The romantic image of stone giants where knights and ladies warm themselves by the fireplace is just a beautiful illusion. The reality was much colder, darker, and required a daily exhausting struggle for survival. Watch the video to the end to find out how a medieval bed was turned into an impregnable fortress against the cold, and why the largest fireplace in the castle was almost useless for heating. Natural stone has very high thermal conductivity and enormous heat capacity according to the laws of physics. In practice, this means that it very easily and quickly absorbs the surrounding cold from the air, and then very slowly, over the course of months, releases it back. Even if a bright fire was constantly burning in the huge fireplaces inside the castle's vast halls, its modest heat was completely insufficient to warm the thick stone walls to a comfortable temperature. The frozen walls constantly acted as an inexhaustible source of piercing cold, continuously radiating it into all the interior rooms of the castle day and night. Being in a room next to such an icy stone wall was absolutely like standing right next to a wide-open window on a frosty, windy day outside. The cold from the walls was physically felt, penetrating through clothing and forcing people to stay closer to the fire. The warm air from the few fireplaces and burning candles immediately rose, according to the laws of physics, to the cold stone vaults of the castle, where it dissipated into thin air. Below, at human height, where people were, only cold, damp, and humid air remained, from which it was impossible to escape. It turned out that all the heat went where no one could feel it, and people froze in the lower layers of air. Life in a majestic castle in winter was not at all a pleasure of aristocratic luxury and privilege, but a real daily test of physical endurance and patience for all its inhabitants. Even wealthy lords could not buy warmth with money. The technology of the time simply did not allow such huge stone buildings to be heated effectively. In essence, and according to the original plan, medieval castles were designed by military engineers exclusively for warfare and defense against enemies, and not at all for the domestic comfort of their inhabitants. The enormous thickness of the walls, the narrow loopholes for shooting, the strategic location of rooms and corridors, absolutely everything was strictly subordinated to a single goal: the most effective defense of the fortress against siege. Thermal insulation, as we understand it today, simply did not exist in medieval construction practices. There was no insulation in the walls, no double insulated walls, and no airtight windows with double glazing. Medieval castles were practically open to all the cold winds that blew through their corridors, and their unfortunate inhabitants simply had to adapt to these extremely harsh conditions as best they could by dressing warmer. The only protection from the cold was thick clothing, furs, and proximity to the fire. But this was clearly not enough for comfort. The constant, exhausting struggle with this relentless internal cold was the basis of daily survival in the castle for its inhabitants. People spent the winter in a permanent state of chills, which negatively affected the health and life expectancy of even the nobility. It was a completely different world in the Middle Ages, where basic warmth was the main luxury, not comfort. The ability to keep warm was valued above many other blessings, which is difficult for modern people, accustomed to central heating, to understand. It would be very interesting to hear your balanced opinion on this issue. What exactly do you think about how modern heating and construction technologies have radically changed our basic perception of comfort and standards of living compared to the harsh Middle Ages? Please write about this in detail in the comments below. Its size was truly impressive. You could roast a whole bull in the hearth of such a fireplace, but its main function was not so much heating as demonstrating the status and wealth of the castle's owner. The problem lay in its design. The huge open portal and straight, wide chimney acted like a powerful pump. Almost all the heat generated by the fire instantly escaped up the chimney along with the smoke. The efficiency of such a fireplace was negligible. It provided heat only in the immediate vicinity of the fire. Taking a few steps to the side meant being back in the icy cold of the huge hall. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that a huge amount of air was required for the fire to burn. This air was sucked into the hall through numerous cracks in the windows and doors. As a result, the fireplace itself created icy drafts that swept through the room. Smoke was another serious problem. Due to the imperfect design of the chimneys, most of the smoke did not go up the flue, but into the hall. The rooms were constantly smoky, and a thick layer of soot settled on the walls and ceiling. A huge amount of firewood was required to keep the fire going in such a fireplace. The preparation, delivery, and storage of fuel were one of the main concerns of the castle manager. Wood was a valuable resource, and its consumption was enormous. Despite all its shortcomings, the fireplace remained the center of social life. People gathered around its fire to eat, discuss the news, and simply be together. It was the brightest and relatively warmest place in the castle. People sitting by the fire constantly turned to warm one side or the other. It was a kind of ritual familiar to every inhabitant of the castle. It was practically impossible to warm up completely. It was the private living quarters of the lord and his family, a kind of medieval living room. Its name comes from the Latin word sol, meaning sun, and this name was absolutely justified. The secret of the solarium's warmth lay in its thoughtful location. This room was always built on the top floor, usually above the main hall. As we know, warm air rises, and the solarium received additional heat from the fireplace burning below. Moreover, the windows of the solar always faced south, the sunniest side. On clear winter days, the sun's rays penetrated the room, heating the air and objects. It was a free and effective source of heat. The size of the room was also of great importance. Unlike the gigantic and echoing main hall, the solar was relatively small and cozy. Such a compact space was much easier to heat. The solar always had its own small fireplace. It was much more efficient than the giant hearth in the main hall. Its smaller size and more thoughtful design allowed it to give off more heat into the room rather than up the chimney. The walls of the solarium were never left bare. They were decorated with wooden panels or, even better, heavy wool tapestries. These tapestries were not just a luxury item, but an essential element of thermal insulation, blocking the cold coming from the stone. Thick carpets or skins were spread on the floor. They also helped to retain heat in and protected the feet from the cold stone floor. Everything in this room was designed to create maximum comfort. It was in the solar that the lord's family spent most of their time in winter. Here they ate, rested, and received close guests. It was their private, warm refuge from the cold and bustle of the rest of the castle. The main sources of drafts were windows. In the early Middle Ages, windows as we understand them did not exist. They were simple openings in the wall, which at best were covered with wooden shutters or oiled parchment. Loopholes and embrasures designed for shooting were also constant sources of icy air. It was impossible to close them tightly. In winter, the cold blew through them so strongly that it was easy to extinguish a candle. Doors were another problem. They were made of solid planks that dried out and warped over time. There were always huge gaps between the door and the frame. One of the most unexpected sources of cold was the wardrobe, a medieval toilet. It was a simple stone seat located in a niche in the wall, with an opening leading outside. A stream of icy air constantly flowed into the castle through this shaft. The fight against drafts was carried out using primitive but effective methods. Cracks in windows and doors were plugged with moss, tow, or simply old rags. It was a constant job that had to be done over and over again. Heavy curtains made of thick fabric or animal skins were hung on the doors. They created an additional barrier to the cold air. Sometimes several layers of such curtains were used. Special screens were placed in front of fireplaces. They protected those sitting by the fire from the icy drafts that crept across the floor toward the hearth. It was a simple but effective solution. The constant movement of air made staying in the castle extremely uncomfortable. People were forced to constantly look for places protected from drafts. How much do you think such living conditions affected people's health and well-being? The most important element was its structure. The bed of a nobleman was huge, with 4 tall posts at the corners. A wooden frame, or canopy, was attached to these posts. Heavy, thick curtains hung from this frame on all 4 sides. They were made of velvet, wool, or other thick fabric, often lined with fur. At night, these curtains were drawn tightly, creating a small enclosed space. Mattresses or feather beds also played an important role. They were not stuffed with cotton wool or springs, but with natural materials. Poor people slept on straw mattresses, while rich people slept on feather beds stuffed with goose down and feathers. Down and feathers are excellent insulators. They created a soft and warm bed that provided additional protection from the cold. Such a feather bed could be up to half a meter thick. People covered themselves with several layers of blankets and bedspreads. These were made of wool, the best material for retaining heat. The most valuable item was a fur bedspread, which was not only warm, but also demonstrated the high status of its owner. Special warmers were used for additional warmth. These were metal or ceramic vessels in which hot coals from the fireplace were placed. Such a warmer, wrapped in cloth, was placed in bed before going to sleep to warm the sheets. Often, several people slept in one bed. This was done not only because of the lack of space, but also for warmth. The bodies of the sleepers warmed each other, making it easier to endure the night cold. The fundamental principle of medieval clothing was a well-thought-out layering system that created air insulation. No one in their right mind would wear a single thick, warm garment in the hope of keeping warm that way. People methodically dressed in layers like cabbage, deliberately creating air pockets between the numerous layers of clothing, which perfectly retained the precious heat of the human body and did not let it escape. The more layers there were, the warmer a person was, as each layer of air acted as an additional insulator from the cold outside environment. The bottom layer, closest to the body, was a long shirt, or camisole in medieval language, neatly sewn from natural linen fabric produced at home. Linen was a relatively hygienic, natural material that absorbed body sweat well and allowed the skin to breathe, preventing irritation. However, thin linen itself did not keep a person warm at all. Its main practical purpose was to protect more expensive outer clothing from direct contamination with sweat and skin oils. Linen shirts were washed more often than outer clothing, which was important for hygiene in conditions of limited access to water. Over the basic shirt, men always wore long, tight-fitting hose tied to the belt and a loose knee-length tunic, while women wore a long floor-length dress with sleeves that concealed the figure. Absolutely all of these everyday items were sewn mainly from durable woolen fabric of various thicknesses and qualities. Wool was the main indispensable material for clothing throughout the Middle Ages, and there were very good practical reasons for this, proven over centuries. Without wool, it was almost impossible to survive in the medieval climate, especially in the northern regions of Europe. Wool fabric has a unique property. Even when completely wet from rain, it continues to effectively retain body heat, unlike other materials. Its natural fibers have a special hollow porous structure that perfectly traps air inside, creating insulation. In addition, high-quality wool is very wear-resistant and durable, which was critically important in harsh conditions when new clothes were very expensive and inaccessible to ordinary people. One woolen tunic could serve its owner for many years, being passed down to children after the death of their parents. During the cold winter months, an additional thick layer was always worn over the basic tunic or dress, a surcoat or upland, depending on the region and era. This was a loose-fitting, unfastened outer garment, often with long, wide sleeves for freedom of movement. It was also traditionally made of thick, dense wool, sometimes felted for extra protection from the wind. This outer layer protected against wind and rain, preventing the cold from penetrating the body through the lower layers of clothing. Kings and the highest aristocracy wore rare white ermine and precious sable brought from afar, while simpler and poorer people had to make do with affordable squirrel, cheap rabbit, or coarse sheepskin. The quality and quantity of fur directly indicated a person's position in society. It was absolutely necessary to wear a linen cap or a woolen hood covering the ears from the cold. A significant amount of heat, up to 40%, is irretrievably lost through an uncovered head. And medieval people understood this perfectly well empirically, without scientific knowledge. In the cold rooms of the castle, headgear was almost never removed, even during meals, except in the presence of the highest nobility or in church. Walking with an uncovered head in winter was considered reckless and a sure way to get sick. Proper footwear was also critical for keeping feet warm and healthy. Tall leather boots were tightly stuffed with dry straw or wool scraps on the inside to provide extra warmth and cushioning. Indoors, special wooden clogs with platforms could be worn over them to further protect the feet from the cold stone and dirty floors, which were always icy. This double protection for the feet was necessary to prevent frostbite and rheumatism in conditions of constant cold. The heart of any castle kitchen was a huge, massive stone hearth, which with its impressive size could easily rival the ceremonial fireplace in the main hall for guests, and sometimes even surpassed it. But unlike the decorative fireplace, which was only lit periodically, this working hearth operated almost around the clock, without stopping day or night. Something was always cooking in pots, roasting on spits, and baking in ovens, creating incredible heat. The fire in the kitchen was a living thing that needed constant attention and feeding with wood, and it only went out late at night for a few hours. Huge, soot-covered iron cauldrons with a capacity of tens of liters hung on thick chains above the roaring fire, in which thick soups, rich broths, and stewed meat for the servants were cooked for a long time. Whole carcasses of animals, wild boars, deer, and sheep, were methodically roasted on long metal spits, which were slowly rotated by special complex mechanisms with counterweights or by small cooks manually for hours for the master's table. Next to the main hearth were special stone ovens for daily baking of bread and pies, which also constantly radiated a huge amount of additional heat into the room. The temperature in the kitchen could reach unbearable levels, even in the middle of winter. Daily work in such a hot kitchen was incredibly hard and exhausting physical labor, requiring endurance and skill. The cooks and their numerous assistants were constantly on the move, performing dozens of tasks at once: chopping meat, cleaning vegetables, stirring cauldrons.
Are you sure it's safe?
Frozen servants and soldiers often deliberately sought any excuse or reason to enter the warm kitchen under the pretext of business, and at least warm themselves a little by the fire, warming their numb hands. The kitchen was a magnet for all the freezing inhabitants of the castle seeking refuge from the cold. It was in the hot kitchen with its constant warmth that clothes and shoes wet from rain or snow could be dried quickly and effectively. Chilled servants and soldiers on patrol regularly brought their wet, heavy cloaks and soaked leather boots here, hanging them by the fire. The strategic location of the kitchen within the castle structure was very often dictated by serious fire safety considerations for the entire building. The huge open fire of the hearth, burning constantly, posed a serious potential threat to the wooden structures of the castle, beams, floors, and furniture. Therefore, prudent builders tried to construct the kitchen at a considerable distance from the lord's living quarters and important rooms, often in a separate building. In the event of a fire in the kitchen, which happened quite often, the fire was not supposed to spread to the main buildings and destroy the entire castle. Despite the objectively difficult and exhausting working conditions in the heat and stuffiness, the kitchen was, paradoxically, the warmest, coziest, and perhaps the most lively and noisy place in the entire Cole Castle. It was the real driving force and heart of the castle, which not only fed all its inhabitants 3 times a day, but also, in the most literal physical sense, warmed them with its excess heat. Life here was bustling, bubbling, and never quiet at any time of the year or day, whether summer or winter, day or night. Heat in a medieval castle depended directly on one simple resource: firewood. But what seems simple to us today was a complex logistical task in those days. Providing the castle with fuel for the winter was a matter of strategic importance. The castle's need for firewood was enormous. Just one large fireplace in the main hall could burn several cubic meters of wood a day. And there were also fireplaces in other rooms, a hearth in the kitchen, and a forge in the smithy. The right to cut down trees was strictly regulated. The forest belonged to the feudal lord, and the peasants could only collect dead wood there. Firewood for the castle was harvested centrally by special workers. The harvesting process was long and laborious. Trees were felled with axes and saws, then the trunks were cut into logs. All this was done by hand and required enormous physical effort. But simply cutting down a tree was not enough. Freshly cut wood burns poorly, producing a lot of smoke and little heat. The wood had to be left to rest and dry, which took from several months to a year. Special wood piles were built for drying and storing firewood. These were large sheds that protected the wood from rain, but were well ventilated. The winter supply of firewood took up a huge amount of space on the castle grounds. Delivering firewood from the forest to the castle was also a difficult task. It was transported on carts pulled by oxen or horses. In winter, when the roads were covered with snow, fuel delivery could come to a complete halt. Therefore, one of the main tasks of the manager was to create a sufficient supply of firewood before the onset of cold weather. A shortage of fuel in winter could have catastrophic consequences. It was equivalent to a modern army running out of ammunition. Different types of wood were valued differently. Oak and beech produced a lot of heat and burned for a long time. Conifers burned quickly and sparked a lot, so they were used less often. Thus, behind every log burning in the fireplace was the hard work of many people. Heat in the castle did not appear at the snap of a finger. It was the result of complex and well-organized work. The ingenuity of medieval man in this struggle is astonishing. From layered clothing and fortress beds to the thoughtful layout of rooms and the use of tapestries, people found ways to survive and create islands of comfort in the harshest conditions. Please suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. Perhaps you are interested in medieval medicine, cathedral construction, or the daily life of townspeople. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our new historical investigations.